So I am so excited to introduce our first speaker, our opening keynote. We're going to be bringing up Chris Wiggins to the stage. Chris is the chief data scientist at the New York Times. Chris is an associate professor of mathematics at Columbia University. At Columbia, he's also a founding member of the executive committee of the Data Science Institute and the Department of Physics and Applied Mathematics, as well as the Department of System Biology. Chris is going to be sharing with us all how data happened. So I'm so excited to welcome Chris Wiggins to the stage. Let's give him a round of applause.
Can I hit that thing?
Yeah, and there's a
Hooray. How many minutes would you like me to speak?
20.
You got it. Okay, welcome to the event. Thank you all for making time for hackNY. Say what?
Choke up on the mic.
Like this? You like put it in my face?
Yep.
You got it. Hooray. Okay, thank you very much for making time for hackNY and for being here. As advertised, I'm Chris Wiggins, and I thought I'd share with you a little bit today about this book I wrote, but we can talk about other stuff. And if you, and this is a book about how data happened, which has a dumpster fire on the left and a book on the right, and in the middle is Buzz Lightyear. Buzz Lightyear was a cartoon character from a previous millennium, and he was irrationally exuberant all the time. And so Buzz is there because we have hope. And so part of the goal of teaching this class, and also the book, was to give people a sense of being realistic about various dumpster fires that people are concerned about, but also to give people hope that there are ways that we can address and mitigate dumpster fireology. And if you'd like to know more, it's all in the GitHub, of course, like a civilized professor, all the class material, and then the book has a short link there. So it's nice to meet you. Okay, so by way of context, I wrote these 2 books about data science during the plague. How Data Happened is a book that I co-authored with a history professor. I'm not a historian. I'm merely a fan of history. And then Data Science in Context was real-life computer scienticians. And then at the New York Times, I lead a team that develops and deploys machine learning. So we build the recommendation engines, the paywall, a bunch of other stuff that you may have interacted with. That's my people. And then for the last 24 years, I've been a faculty member in the engineering school at Columbia doing machine learning. And then I co-founded hackNY, which is the reason we're all here together on a Sunday morning. Hooray. So I thought I would use the book as a arguing point, sort of the beginning of a conversation, sort of organizing some comments that I wanted to share with y'all about data and how data happens. So the book, if you choose to engage, was developed based on this class that we taught for 7 years to Columbia undergraduates who are a very demanding bunch. And so we thought we were going to teach a class on the history of data science, and the students really pushed us to dig into how data is impacting society. So it became really a history and ethics of data around part 1, which was like a history of statistics and things that you could have done before you had digital computers. Part 2, and about how computers just changed the whole game of making sense of the world through data. And part 3, about the present stakes. And what are we going to do about it? So the students really pushed us to move the class from a class about the history of data science to really looking at what was driving the narrative around data at the time that the class was born. So we taught the class for the first time in spring of 2017, just a few months before our friend Kathy O'Neill wrote this book, Weapons of Math Destruction, and Sophia Noble's book about the way that search, instantiates, reifies, and amplifies a particular worldview about what's important. Virginia Eubanks then wrote this great book about how the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed yet, not in a good way, meaning that technologies of oppressions are generally tested out on people who are not from socioeconomic backgrounds where they can push back on that oppression, which is then distributed to the rest of us. First they came for whatever group you want to think of before it came for us. Shoshana Zuboff wrote this great book illustrating for people the cons of a world in which everything is free because we are the product. And Ruha Benjamin, even in the first few years of the class's existence, wrote this great book about the particular American way that race intersects with technology and amplifies some of the disparate impact from all of the other technologies. Lisa Nakamura, who's a scholar of science and technology studies in Michigan, summed it up well with a class which is called The Internet is a Trash Fire. And she gives a talk where she says, I teach a class called The Internet is a Trash Fire, and I don't have to explain to anyone what that means. So the blurb about this talk said I was going to talk a little bit about data and where it came from. And it's true that there's a great story about statistics, the thing that you learn as an undergraduate statistics class, and where did it come from, because you just sort of get exposed to it, and there's p-values and hypothesis testings and type 1s and type 2 errors, and it's kind of brutally boring and utilitarian. So there's a story in the book about where statistics came from as a field. So we'd like to tell that story about how even the word statistics has this great history as a term that's battled over in the same way that artificial intelligence is now a term now. So there's a great story there and about who wants to create a field of statistics. And spoiler, it's generally the people who are already in power. In this case, people want to create a field in order to make society better, really advanced at the end of the 19th century as the Victorian Empire feels its waning greatness and feels a desire to make the empire great again. And the latest tool of the day, which is numbers and data, is brought to bear to advance that greatness. So that's a story, I have to say, I don't want to spend a lot of time because it's well told. I mean, it's a story occult, but not by design. It's just who wants to read about statistics, I understand. But if you want to know more, Stephen Jay Gould has this great book on the mismeasure of man and about the various ways that we have for 125 years reified the idea that you can order people by any one axis, like smartness, and about the way people have invented mathematical tools to try to think that you could say, oh, this person is smarter than the other, as though the complexity of our brains is reducible to one number. Of course, it gets right into measuring people's heads. It's a deeply racist and terrible story done by some of the best scientists. I encourage you to dig in so that you can see how strange the present is. You know, it's nice to use history, I have found, to find a time that's far enough back that we can be like, well, clearly those people were not right thinking, but close enough that you can see what are the parallels to the way people are deconstructing the world today. And once you know the history, you see it every day. Like every headline, you're like, oh, I've seen that before. And of course, Sir Francis Galton, who gave us the word correlation, the word regression, the word eugenics. It was all part of one paradigm and one program. Anyway, I wanted to talk to you a bit more about the present day. You are living in a world bathing in artificial intelligence, which is a hilarious thing if you know the history of the field. The field was invented, the term was invented by this guy, and he's on record. This guy is, just so I know my audience, does anybody know this guy? Good. All right, so this guy is John C. McCarthy. He was a PhD from Princeton in pure mathematics, partial differential equations. And he's on record a couple of years later when people were annoyed at artificial intelligence. That was 1973. So in 1973, there was this great debate in London where people were so tired of hearing about how great artificial intelligence is that they had this little debate about AI. And he piped up and said, I invented the term artificial intelligence when we were trying to get money for a summer study. And I show you this quote because sometimes when people say what they're doing with AI, particularly in startups, it feels like they're just telling you they're using AI because they're trying to get money. And I want you to know it always has been that way. So they got money for these 7 white dudes to hang out in Dartmouth in the summer of 1956, which they did. Claude Shannon is on the right. John McCarthy is next to him. The infamous Marvin Minsky is next to McCarthy. And I can't go into all the other history except just to tell you that they had no idea what they were doing. So I want you to know that the people who came up with AI were not like amazing genii that saw the future entirely. They were like, we don't know. Maybe we'll talk about neuron nets. Maybe we'll talk about automatic computers, which we would now think of as programming language. You have to remember that in 1955, like, there was no natural language processing. There was no languages, right? So basic ideas that are now whole fields of computer science they were trying to make up. And that is now, and by now I mean 10 years ago, because this is an article from 2015, AI is like the wee little interesting bit to those of us who like machine learning at the heart of what is now AI products, right? Like when you build AI and deploy it, boop, 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 as a software tool, right? The ML is one little interesting nugget, but it's just some wee little nugget of what is now a powerful system, which brings us to power. And so there's a lot of interesting stuff in the book that I hope you engage with. But many of you self-identify as software people. How many people identify as developers or software engineers? Okay, good. So you're building the future, and it's a future that's increasingly powerful. Mark Andreessen, the programmer turned venture capitalist turned philosopher king, wrote 15 years ago, software is eating the world, and he's right, in part because he invested an abundance of capital in order to make that come true. Which brings us to a chapter called The Battle for Data Ethics, which when we were writing there still was a battle for data ethics. I feel like that battle has now been abandoned, and so it becomes part of a history chapter in a history book. But I want to capture that for y'all. Ethics. Ethics is a word that you might encounter in philosophy class if you ever took it, and then you're like, man, that was a drag. I have no idea what those people were talking about in that philosophy class. Back to beep, boop, boop, boop. It's a word that different people use to different things, and that is why in 2018, at a meeting of AI Now, a law professor at NYU said, when I hear the word ethics, I want to strangle ethics. Professor Philip Alston did not mean that ethics is bad and he doesn't want it to exist. He meant, I'm so tired of hearing people use the word ethics to mean different things. It drives me crazy. It's true that this is a word that's been used by different people in the same way that statistics or artificial intelligence or data science has been used by different people, often people with some interest in it. And watching the rise and wane of that field, I think we have some useful things we can hang on to as the people who are developing these tools. Again, I've said a little bit about data ethics as it relates to a narrative 2017 to 2019 when a number of scholars, all women scholars, were pointing out something is wrong on the internet. There is one narrative about ethics being about privacy, and that's a thing that we as technologists can get our heads around. You know, LaTanya Sweeney, for example, when she was a graduate student, pointed out, just because you strip out the name field from some table of, for example, medical records, doesn't mean that it is secure from attacks. And she illustrated this easily by pointing out that if you have voter records, which you can buy for $20, you can join the name and address. You can use zip, birth date, and sex as a composite join key onto the anonymous medical records and easily identify people. So privacy is a thing that we as technologists are used to thinking about. It has technical meaning. Or fairness. We as technologists are used to thinking about fairness because we can try to take fairness as a statement that can be quantified. We can write down a loss function that's like accuracy minus unfairness, and we can optimize that loss function. We're really good at optimizing loss functions in technology. Julia Angwin and coworkers at ProPublica did a great job pointing out just how bad fairness can be as a concern. For example, when the state of Florida uses black box automated algorithms to make its sentencing decisions or to score people for their possible recidivism, and then judges actually use that algo when they're thinking about how to deploy criminal justice. They also open sourced their code, which led to a little mini tech field of tech fixes, as technologists think, well, we can turn ethics into fairness, we can turn ethics into justice, justice into fairness, fairness into algebra, and algebra into code, and we can fix ethics. So that's a very small part of what ethics means. Instead, people who come from academia are used to thinking about ethics in terms of principles that are inherently in tension. And this is a tradition which is well baked into any academic who's been working on human subjects research since like the 1970s. This is a forgotten book, which you can tell is forgotten because if you go to Amazon, it's called Forgotten Books. And basically it outlines the principles that led to the way ethics has been instrumentalized. Where's Shai? Shai, because, so I actually lost track of time entirely, I'm so sorry. So I was gonna ask somebody to tell me, because I closed the app, the Arc browser. Thank you. And what time should I stop talking? You got it, Claire. Shrug it is. Brilliant, I can do that. So ethics. Ethics is not about fairness. Ethics is not about a loss function. Ethics is not about privacy and technical reconstruction of data. Ethics is about a set of principles that are inherently in tension with each other, including respect for persons, the idea that people should get to choose how they use the tech, they should make informed choices, versus beneficence, which is a fancy philosophy word for harms. How much are you benefiting people and how much are you hurting them? And justice, which is a statement that includes fairness as well as an understanding of oppression. And this is exactly how academic research on human subjects has been adjudicated since the 70s, is that these are principles that are inherently in tension and that decisions will have to be made balancing these tensions, holding these things in tension. It's not going to be a checklist or a loss function. Now, that's a bit about how you define ethics, and I encourage you to engage with that literature. It's got 50 years of stress testing. How do you design for ethics? Well, designing a process for ethics is generally absent from the structures we inhabit. The containers that are corporations are not set up inherently to have ethics as part of their function, which has been frustrating for technologists, and you really saw it blossom or erupt in the latter half of I would say the last decade. There's a good article about this from 2019 called The Tech Revolt, just interviewing technologists about things that they did 2016 through 2017 in reaction to things that their companies were doing that they felt were bad, but they didn't really have like a language for how to define why that was bad, nor a set of processes for how to respond. There are many responses. These include walking out or leaking to people. In general, humans often are subject to this phenomenon of moral injury. You might get promoted for something, and then afterwards you feel like, I got promoted for it, but that was bad. And you see that, in the recent book about Facebook, Careless People, or in Frances Haugen's Whistleblowing, or in the Center for Humane Technology. These are all examples of initiatives started by technologists who left technology and said, that was a concern. This is well known in some literatures that most technologists don't engage with. Here's an example of an article from a law review just enumerating different things that technologists do when they act as private regulators: written advocacy, walkouts, resignations, shareholder proposals. But I want to remind you that all of you, and also thinking about launching a thing as something where the QA is not just auditing the statistical performance and whether or not it's driving a KPI, but how do you meet with people to adjudicate the ethical impact of a thing that you are launching. There's a great article by Deb Raji, Meg Mitchell, Timnit Gebru, and coworkers. Meg Mitchell and Timnit are well known for their early work pointing out concerns around large language models long before we all had learned that term. They were pointing out the ethical impact. I say that this was a history chapter because, around the time that our book came out, our book launched in March 2023, and that same month there was this headline: as artificial intelligence booms, tech firms are laying off their ethicists. In some sense, the battle for data ethics was in deep retreat by the spring of 2023. So there was a time when companies were at least thinking about how to architect their companies for ethics. No longer. It's up to us. Those solutions are an unstable three-player game. It's an unstable three-player game between corporate power, state power, and people power. That's you. State power is powerful, but not easy for us to drive directly, and itself kind of unpredictable. Corporate power has its own interests, and sometimes it'll hire a bunch of ethicists. Sometimes it will fire them all. But you, as the people, are the people who are supplying the talent, supplying the data, and are a key point in that, particularly for companies where the product is free, because you are the product, right? You are the people supplying those data. So I encourage you to be thoughtful about that, both as individuals and with your fellow members of talent, right? The people who make these companies go. When you decide where to work, when you decide what to build, when you decide how to build it, there are ethical decisions at play. I'll leave you with some things that I hope people get out of the book. One is that we went into the book thinking, we're going to teach a class on history of data science, and really we learned a different arc entirely from the students. My feeling is that there's important material both in the class and the books that's not being taught to the future statisticians nor to the future senators and CEOs, which is a group that's intersecting more and more. So we hope that people, both technological and non-technological, see how data and power are related. We learned sort of a secret history that data, truth, and power are intimately connected. And I hope you enjoy that book, and maybe the more technological book as well, which has a lot of ethics in it. And I'm happy to hear more anytime. You can email me at c@hackny.org. Thank you very much.